All right, so today we're gonna, as Laura teed it up, we're gonna talk about transforming data into actionable knowledge. So it's extracting and maximizing the value of every precious data point. But if you really talk about what that means, it's really acknowledging the human factor in the equation. It's people that participate in research, and it's they who generate the data. It's they who own the data, and it's they who want to make sure that the utility of their data is absolutely maximized. And then on the other end, there's people setting up the infrastructure for research to happen, people funding the research, people making sure that the databases are sound and ready to be shared and integrated, and people ready to make that happen once data get integrated. So there's going to be a lot of people factoring into the discussions today. This is our mission, and you see the pictures there. It's all about the people. That's why we're here. That's what motivates us to do everything. And this is the testament of what you have been able to generate. This is your victory. Close to 700,000 individual records across clinical trials from industry, observational studies from academia, and electronic health records. This would not have happened without the people that participated in all those research opportunities and that contributed the data, the push they had to make sure that the value of those data were maximized, and everybody that made it happen after that. This is your victory. And we want to keep that growing, but it's not just about the data. It's about what the data can provide in terms of insights and knowledge. Yesterday, you went to the Lunch and Learn about our data platform. That's going to be heavily featured today, but it links to what we discussed today, connecting the dots. You get the data into the platform. You make sure that the platform allows for the knowledge to be generated, and that's what allows, in a collaborative way, for the solutions to be built. So that's the part about tell me the context of use. Understand what question you want to answer and what analytics you need to run in order to make things happen. But because this is all about the people and the people that are making it happen and acknowledging the people factor in the equation, I want to make sure that we take a moment and we thank everyone that made this conference possible, everyone on the CPATH team that helped make this happen. So if you can, give the team at CPATH that is staffing the registration booth to making sure that we are all honest with our slides and make sure that we are properly fed and make sure that we have a fun time. Let's thank them. Let's give every one of them a hand. They're standing in the back. All right. So there's a striped guitar that you see in that picture, but I'm going to talk about another striped guitar. Our friends from Nord have a well-known campaign for Rare Disease Day of wearing your stripes. And because the zebra is the mascot of rare and orphan diseases, I went ahead and got my hands on a zebra striped guitar and recorded a video for Rare Disease Day. And that guitar became the CPATH Rare Disease guitar that got shipped to Nashville. And thanks to Kizzy Black, our communication specialist, she got none other than Peter Frampton, who also has rare diagnosis, to sign the guitar. And that guitar is going to our friends from the National Organization of Rare Disorders for their annual meeting. So this is how we're going to keep rocking drug development. If anybody doesn't have plans past 8 p.m. tonight, Peter Frampton is playing a few blocks from here. We have 8 tickets for you guys in the audience to pick during the morning break, the first 8 p.m. people that sign up at the registration booth will get a gift for tonight's Peter Frampton concert. So, rocking drug development. But then I'm also going to tee up a greeting from our good friend and ally, Steve Gleason. He wrote this book, An Impossible Life, and there's a picture of me nerding out with Steve on some dialogue about data sharing and the people factor in the equation in DC earlier this year. He's one of those rock stars that reminds us every day of why we do what we do. And so he took the time in his home to record the message that you're going to hear. And it's all about the people factor in the equation.
Hello everyone at the CPATH Global Impact Conference. My name is Steve Gleason. Though I'm not there in person, I'm excited to be part of this important event. In 2011, I was diagnosed with ALS, and since then, my life has been a testament to urgency, the urgent need for effective treatments that can alter the progression of devastating disease. Through my journey with ALS, and founding both Team Gleason and Answer ALS, I've seen firsthand the powerful impact that happens when we really listen to those living with these conditions, and make their experiences a central part of developing treatments. Those of us who face these diseases every day bring essential perspectives to the table. Our lived experiences should directly inform the science and policies meant to help us. This leads me to the need for innovation in regulatory science. We need pathways that adapt with the speed of our lives and our deteriorating disease progression. It's crucial that regulatory bodies consider more adaptive, compassionate approval processes, especially when existing alternatives fall short. I'm speaking to you as a proponent of relentless collaboration. The magic happens when patients, researchers, industries, and regulators converge with a shared goal to transcend boundaries and embrace the public-private partnership models like those championed by CPATH. These are the no resources left untapped. In our quest to save and extend the quality of life, I remain optimistic about these opportunities. I believe in the power of science and partnership. I believe that together we can push the boundaries of what's possible, making bold progress in how we fight rare diseases. We can turn fear into frontiers of opportunity. We can turn suffering into stories of success. We can turn challenges into catalysts for innovation. Thank you for your commitment to this cause and for your partnership in this journey towards a healthier, more hopeful world. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. Let's continue to innovate, and most importantly, collaborate, because when we do, anything is possible. Have a great conference. Thank you, and always remember to keep exploring.
Okay, so if that's not a reminder of what we do, why we do what we do, I don't know what is. So with that, we're going to move into the next session of the day. And as we work into the technical miking situation, which is totally fine, let me introduce you to a good friend from EMA, Patrice Verpillat. He is the head of real-world data and real-world evidence at the European Medicines Agency, and he's going to share with us some pretty valuable insights on this topic of moving from data to knowledge. Patrice, take it away.
Thank you. I hope it works now. Perfect. So lots of emotions this morning, including the one I saw someone who was with me in the elevator where we'll be stuck for 15 minutes. So don't take the number 1, please, because you may not know when you will get out. So yes, disclaimer, I just wanted to shortly present you a little bit about what we're doing now at the European Medicine Agency, because it has completely changed over the last few years in terms of indeed using the data and to move it to knowledge indeed, so it fits the purpose of this session. And that's the clinical vision that we have, clinical evidence vision that we have when it comes to this. And as expected, I would say we are here to support patients. And for sure, the first principle is that patient voice guides every steps of the way. The other point is that the evidence generation is definitely planned and guided by the purpose, indeed, what it's supposed to aim to solve. The data, for sure, the knowledge and the expertise. The research question, and that's again something which may be obvious to everyone, but always nice to remind, drives the evidence choice and embrace the full spectrum of the data and the methods, which means that from a regulatory perspective, we will never tell you indeed which methods or data to be used, but we can help you to find the right ones. Another important things, I know we are discussing a lot since yesterday about observational data, but for us as regulator, at least in the EU, clinical trials remain core and are supposed to be bigger, better, and faster. I could also say smarter. But the other point since the last 2 years and a half, let's say this, when we started to pilot the use within the European Medicine Agency, is that we aim to have real-world evidence enabled and the value of real-world evidence established over a certain number of use cases. And you will see more on the next slides. And the last point is definitely that we also really focus on having a high level of transparency in what we do, because we think that that's the only way to underpin social trust, and that's an important point. So at the European Medicine Agencies, there are 3 ways or pathways to use real-world data for the generation of real-world evidence. The first one is that, like any pharma companies or any other agencies, also we access to some data sets, and my team is based on epidemiology and statistics, data science as main skills. So we are doing stuff for the agency and the different committees. We have access to primary and secondary care data from France, Germany, and UK, and we are trying to expand this. But we have also a lot of these studies which are done via what we call procured framework contracts. And these framework contracts are a kind of public-private partnership to some extent, because we have contract with 8 research organizations, which can be CROs, so like IQVIA, for example, but also academic centers like Utrecht University or the Danish University. And thanks to them, we have also access to a wide network of data and also of expertise. You see the figures on this slide. And the last path, which is now becoming the more important one, is what we call Darwin EU. So I will have a slide specifically on this soon to explain what it is. But it has been set up in February 22, and we are now in the 3rd year. And you will see we are doing quite a lot of studies now by using this network. So in fact, the different use cases are the traditional ones. I was in the industry before for 20 years, and I was doing that job already to some extent, saying that now I'm on the regulatory setting. You know, I'm just using data on the same purpose. First, to understand the clinical context. We talked a lot yesterday about the context of use. And in fact, we are doing studies to look at the disease epidemiology, how patients are managed, how drugs are used. We are also helping to some studies could be designed if it would be feasible, and I will have specific use cases to show you how this can be done on the pediatric setting, and also how representatives are the data that are provided by the different pharma companies. And the last point, it's a little bit more traditional, I will say, because since many years, I would say regulators are used to use real-world data to assess comparative safety, I would say, but we're also doing some comparative effectiveness studies now to support HTA bodies or payers. And we're also looking a lot to the impact of our regulatory decisions. So in fact, we've just published end of June, I think, if I'm correct, or beginning of July this year. end of use was the first one. Our second annual report to describing what we have done over this period. So February 23 to February 24. It's not January, but February, because it matched the anniversary date of Darwin. Unfortunately, I will say, so it's always a little bit weird. And in fact, you see that during that period, 1 year, we got 60 research topics from the different stakeholders we were working with. We'll see this again in a few minutes. And we had also to deal with 18 previous of these research topics that were just presented to us at the end of the year before. And in fact, you see that a part of them were feasible. And I can tell you that if you compare with the previous report, this has increased, which is great. But also a part of it, it's still not feasible. Not feasible because we may not have the right data. We may have maybe the right data, but no prescriptions or no patient having the drug or being exposed to it. So it's still an issue for us because in that case, it means that we can't help in the regulatory decision. When it's feasible, you see, we have completed 22 studies over this period. Some are still ongoing because indeed it's a year. It does not mean that all are coming in February 23, but also later. And amongst the one completed during the year, 9 were done with Darwin EU, which was quite improved compared to the previous year because it was only 3. 9 were done via the framework contract, so the middle part of what I presented before, and 4 were done in-house. So Darwin EU, Darwin means that analysis and real-world interrogation of data, expertise, and services. And you can see there, I don't know if there is a, yeah, anyway, I can't show you here in this, but it's managed by a coordinating center, which is the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. And this coordinating center is working with us, EMA, which means my team, more or less. And we are in connection with all the different committees from the agency. So I know there are lots of acronyms on these slides, but I will tell you more a little bit. CHMP is where you submit the dossier for an initial approval. The SWAP is where you go for scientific advice and so on. And we work also with non-regulatory stakeholders. I was mentioning already the HTA bodies, payers, but also we work with the European CDC. We work with the European Commission and others. And via the coordinating center, in fact, we have access, indirect access to a certain number of what we call data partners. And these are also a kind of public-private partnership because the coordinating centers is helping us to do the questions from the different committees or different stakeholders. Then we analyze the question, see if indeed this makes sense or not. Then we send it to the coordinating center, who is doing a feasibility assessment. Based on the feasibility assessment report, we decide if we go or not to a study. If we decide to move to a study, then they are telling us with which data partners this study will be done. And most of the time, we aim to have a quite large representativeness within the EU. So we expect at least 5 data partners included per studies. And once they have the results, they centralize everything, aggregate, put into a report, and then send it back to the agency. So in terms of data partners, we have access, thanks to this network now, to more than 130 million active patients, which may be not enough because in fact in Europe we are 3 times more, but we are moving. Indeed, we started with 10, we got 20 on these slides, and we are working to get 10 more by the end of this year, and we expect to get at least 40 by next year. So you see, most of the key European countries, we still miss some important countries, and we're working on this, like Italy, Poland, or Sweden, and a quite diverse number of data sets, because you can have primary care data, hospital data, biobanks, as you can see in the UK and Estonia, and also some registries, I will say, like the Norwegian one, the Danish one, but also cancer registries. What are the key criteria that guide us when we select these data partners, thinking for sure about the quality of the data, because we do 600 different tests on the quality before onboarding these data partners within Darwin. It's for sure the geographical aspects. We'd like to get as much as possible EU-wide representation. The type of the data, we have still some interest in specialty registries, biomarkers for sure, OTC information, medical device information, because we know there will be some topics coming in. And also we know they have also some undercovered population like pediatrics and the pregnant women and so on. So we're also looking at expanding the network thanks to this. So 2 use cases to show you how it has been used. For sure, I have much more, but I needed to select. One is on pediatric systemic lupus erythematosus. And there were a discussion at the PDCO, which is the pediatric committee, about indeed potential studies to be requested to the marketing authorization holder in this indication. And they asked us to look at how was the pediatric SLE compared to the adult SLE. And we did a study indeed looking at the patient characteristics, looking at the treatments. And thanks to that, they were able indeed to see that it was quite useful information on the similarities between adult and children, and also dissimilarities. And they help us, this helped us indeed to request the right studies to the MAH. Another one, which is, I think, a famous one, even in this side of the ocean, is about the GLP-1 and the risk of suicidal thoughts and self-injury. So to make a long story short, indeed, we had a signal based on a study, which was showing that it was not so clear. In fact, so the agency asked us, the pharmacovigilance committee asked us to perform our own study to look at this effect. And we confirmed that indeed there were no clear signal, in fact, despite the number of patients exposed and the number of outcomes. And the conclusion was that the available evidence did not support a causal association between the drug and this outcome, and no update on the product information was needed. My final slides is just to tell you that for sure I've shown you the European context, but we are working in an international environment, and with our colleagues from FDA, Health Canada, but also with others, we hopefully have finalized comments to this ICH new guidelines, which is M14, which is really the first guidelines dedicated to observational studies, focusing first on safety. And we will look at all the comments and try to finalize these guidelines via ICH in the coming month. But also more importantly, following all the work we do within the ICMRA, which is the International Coagulation of Regulatory Medicine Agencies. In fact, we have also a reflection paper, which has been endorsed by ICH in June this year, which will complement nicely M14, because this will be now on the effectiveness with that focus, knowing that we will also start to also better define what we mean by real-world data and real-world evidence, because that's the starting point. And that's the end.
Yeah, Maurice, because now we have a pretty relevant panel. So if I may ask the panelists, Robin, Angela, Rich, Paulo, Patrice. Okay, so Colin and I are going to take care of this one. And it's all about going from data to knowledge. And we have the perspectives from the clinicians driving the research industry, the advocacy side of things, and of course, the regulatory perspective. So, do you want to?
No, Patrice, do you want to expand upon some of the comments that you had, with how you've worked in these partnerships and how data has really contributed to success, and maybe highlight some additional ones that you didn't speak to in your slides?
Yeah, I think it's clear that without data, we can't do anything. It does not mean that we need to accept any data, at least. We had sometimes lengthy discussion with some committee members because they say, okay, we need some data at least. They say yes, and that's always better than no data. And we do not generate data search. So we need to find the data where they are. And that's important indeed that we have this public-private partnership, because some of these data are there. If they have the right quality to respond to regulatory questions, definitely this is something that I would say is worth to get. It means also that, as I was explaining, we have 600 different checks via Darwin EU in terms of quality. We have also published what we call a data quality framework, and the chapter dedicated to real-world data will be released soon for public consultation. So it means, indeed, we need quality. We need to check also the usefulness of this data. And then when we are confident that indeed it can help us to answer at least some of the questions, we are not naive also. We know that not all questions will be answered. Then having them on board is very valuable. And we see this every day, more or less.
Thank you. Robin, we'll go to FDA with Robin. Robin, you've been closely involved with RDCA-DAP, which is sort of our equivalent to Darwin. Do you want to share some of your experience and the importance of like data harmonization and standardization, and then maybe some successes that you've seen in sort of drug development tools using real-world data?
So I think that first of all, I think we can all know from what we heard yesterday, what we heard today, data sharing is really critically important. And so I'm sitting up here kind of in this in kind of a dual role, right? Because we're talking about data sharing, but I'm the director of patient-focused drug development in CDER. And I think that that's what's really, for us, I feel like that's something that's really key, right? Like we hear a lot from patients that they want their data to be useful. They want their data to, contribute to the science. And we know that there are times where maybe programs are not able, drug development programs are not able to move forward. And so knowing that that data can be shared in kind of this controlled environment and such is really, important to patients who are taking their time and putting in the effort to really, contribute to the science and move things forward. And obviously, Rich is here and is going to talk a little bit more probably about the patient perspective than I have, because I'm just repeating kind of what I've been told. But I think that along with the importance of that data standardization so that we make it cleaner and easier to kind of share the data and more efficiently, and it really makes it less of a lift for people to share data, I think is really critically important. And I know for use cases, I know last year you guys talked a lot about the Friedreich's ataxia data and how that was data that there was able to provide some of the confirmatory evidence that led to approvals. I think I'm assuming I missed the prep call, so I assume maybe that Paolo is going to talk a little bit about givinostat, or if some great use cases. But I would be a little remiss, just not to go on forever, but I would be a little remiss to also see a lot of that that information and the uses that don't make it to FDA. Like we don't necessarily see this when you're using the data to inform your, your disease progression model or your clinical trial simulations and things like that. So similar to like how people are using patient experience data as you're doing your drug development program, and we don't necessarily see that in an application, but we know that it's really helpful and informative. Sharing the use cases, sharing how industry is using the data that they're getting from the RDCA-DAP, and sharing it with CPAS, sharing it in platforms like this are really important for us as a community to really understand all of the value and the richness that this brings to the table.
That brings me to Rich. A nice segue. Rich, you represent, ALS Association, and you've been involved with different projects around real-world data. Can you elaborate on some of your experiences in involving, persons with lived experience with contributing their data? And, what do you think is the importance of, advocating for use of that data, as well as their involvement in synthesizing, the instruments and tools that might come out of that to help drug development?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Colin, especially for the opportunity to speak before you today. I've been thinking about this as far as the approach of the conference and even this panel. And I decided, since it's your 20th anniversary, is to bake you a cake, metaphorically. And so what I would like to do is start the layers, sort of describe the layers of this cake. The first thing is we're going to talk about education. And we've been unpacking that collaboration, integration, and innovation. So I'm doing all these INs. I would also describe this cake as no good cake is good without the icing. So I'm going to describe that as the voice of the patient. This is the type of icing that you find in between all the layers of these cakes. And then the last part of this vision is conceive of the 20 candles on top that are lit. In ALS, it is a terminal disease. Most people live from 2 to 5 years after diagnosis. It takes a tremendous amount of time, from 15 to 18 months to diagnose this disease. All that to say is that they do not have a lot of time. So any conceivable data point is important to them. This also described that the patient perspective on this is everybody who I have met that is a person living with ALS, a person walking with this disease, as well as their family members, are more than, I mean, these people are the most active community. I mean, seriously, they really do want to contribute to the research. And so giving them opportunities to not only engage with the private-public partnerships, to engage with the federal agencies, to share their data. Although I would say because they are so willing to do so, we have to do it in a meaningful manner. We have to have feedback loops to them. We have to personalize medicine for them. And we have to make it meaningful so that they feel that they are contributing to this greater good, that they will, through their efforts, see the therapies, see new technologies, be able to have them, experiment with them, and utilize them, and also be able to take research and make that immediately clinically viable. So hopefully that answers a little bit.
Works really good. Do you have something?
No.
Okay. No, I think it was good, Rich. One of the things I've really valued as working with the ALS community, so we really value your time and your voice. I mean, I was looking for people in the audience, so I know you represent many of them, so thank you. How would you like to relate to your experience and use of real world data? Because you've done some really elegant work in a recent study, and hopefully you can elaborate on some of your experience using data and how that led to the success of your program.
So actually, the use of data that were collected in different consortia was actually very key in the development of GVNester. And I can probably highlight 3 main areas where we have actually worked quite a lot on the data. The first one is when we actually started the clinical development of GVNester, in essence, everybody was actually following the same approach, which was a 1-year study, ideally select a progressive population of patients, and then using the endpoint that at the time was most popular, which was a 6-minute walk test. Unfortunately, actually, that approach did not work. I mean, there are plenty of failed studies with that approach. And so it was very clear to us that we had to actually change the paradigm. And so actually, the use of data from natural history was actually very key in actually giving us the instrument to say, okay, we should go down this pathway. And in fact, we designed our pivotal study very differently, with the 18 months duration, with actually selecting a patient population that was not as progressive as in the past, and then also using the Forster climb as our primary endpoint. The second area where we actually used the data from different consortia was actually in applying imaging in our pivotal study. So we actually measured fat fraction as a secondary endpoint, and that was also quite important to our development. The last one was actually to try and use the natural history data to look at long-term effect, looking at milestones like loss of mobility.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to that end, Paulo, you've been also in the public-private partnership journey since the very early days of our collaboration in Duchenne. And you've seen how a lot of tools have been developed with your involvement in that partnership, and how those tools are being presented to both FDA and EMA, but how both agencies have been really receptive to the notion of when we reach a milestone of additional maturity with those tools, that companies can start using them in their programs even before we get the final endorsement from either EMA or FDA on the tools. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, this is actually very important because I mean, I mentioned our starting point in 2015, where actually these tools were not yet available. And so it took us quite a lot of work to actually find the data, analyze them in the proper way and all that. I think the tools is an incredible step forward in that direction, because it can really help quite rapidly if you want any company that wants to start a clinical trial to better understand which are the problems, which are the risks, how to deal with that. This is actually a very significant step forward.
Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, like what tools that you've been involved in, and maybe the meaningful and value them to sponsors as they think through their regulatory strategy.
So obviously, as you know, in Duchenne, there are actually tools that actually describe the progression of the disease. That is actually quite important. And then at the moment, we are also trying to, if you want, evolve that tool, also adding the imaging, so the fat fraction. And that will also provide an even better tool to use. Also keeping in mind one thing, I mean, I think there are two moments in drug development that are actually very important and where the tools actually can be very important. The first one is really at the proof of concept level. I mean, remember we said yesterday, you want to kill fast a product that doesn't work. And I think this is as important as really being able to show efficacy and safety in a pivotal trial.
I'm going to pause there and build on this a little bit, and maybe not all the panel, but maybe some over there. But like for drug development tools, I mean, one of the things to both pharma and regulatory agencies, what value do you see of them? And when those negotiations go on in those tools, do you have any thoughts or things you'd like to elaborate on, sort of how you see them and being available and facilitating the interaction between the regulatory discussions? Does anyone on the panel feel good to?
I can say, I guess you went through the qualification process of the agency, right? So that's something that we try to improve also, because I know we know it's quite burdensome, but the most important for us is definitely that the tool is useful and show how it can be used. So again, we've seen from time to time some tools which have been developed, but with a very limited, a change of 1 point on the scale of 0 to 100. What does it mean concretely for the patient? What does it mean also in terms of indeed, how can we trust that indeed it's not just variability? So the validation of the tool is critical, and the way it's built with the input of the different stakeholders is definitely critical from a regulatory perspective.
Which is true, and obviously in the evolution, adding the MRI, certainly there has been a lot of very close interaction with both authorities, and that has been very, very helpful.
That's always what we ask for, indeed, is indeed coming to us as early as possible, so that it's almost like a partnership here again, to co-develop to some extent, or at least to ensure that the development will end on something which will be positive from a regulatory perspective too.
And I want to go to Angela now, because you're one of those rather unique clinical researchers that are at the forefront of not only treating the people with the conditions, but also knowledgeable about drug development and regulatory science and data sharing. And those are not the typical things you think of when you describe a researcher in that capacity. So can you comment on your experience?
Absolutely. Thank you. That was a compliment, I think.
It was.
So I am a clinical trialist based at an academic institution, working very closely with a number of small biotech who are entering in the ALS space. But I think the first comment I'd like to make is where we are now, and my key area, my predominant area is ALS, is really standing on the shoulders of people who've done other work, right? So I'm not only an ALS doc, which has been helpful for the community because many of the clinical trialists in ALS are only ALS. So in my other lives of watching how Genzyme developed Myozyme, really important way of looking at how you build with the community your outcome measures, and you hit a home run very quietly, but you hit a home run in an ultra rare disease and you're able to expand and use that. The other really important background is the Neuronext network. I don't know if anyone here knows about it, but it's been really important in supporting some longitudinal natural history studies in rare disease and neurology. And as part of its support led to the approval of nusinersen. Nusinersen's approval could not have happened without an academic network natural history study collaborating with a drug developer, okay? Because it allowed the difference between the natural history and the results with nusinersen to be striking. So in ALS, we're in a very active period. We have a long history of academics driving everything in ALS. And some of that's good and some of that could be improved. How's that politically correct? So the good part, and the best example of the good part, is using neurofilament in tofersen, in the tofersen development. Why do I say that? Because neurofilament didn't drop from the sky. You know, it wasn't magic. There was at least a decade, if not 15 years, of academics looking for a biomarker that could be seen to be dramatically elevated in ALS and could separate ALS patients reasonably well, not perfectly, but reasonably well, from disease mimics and other neurodegenerative disease. And those people were not just in one center. There was work from the US. There was a ton of work from Europe. There were individual researchers in the US targeting small groups of patients. So with that, I mean, Bob Bowser did a lot of work. He's in Arizona, works a lot with the FDA, and is now leading the All ALS consortium. Mike Benatar focused very heavily on an ultra rare part of ALS called SOD1, and looked at pre-symptomatics and really mapped out in a particular way, mapped out the story of neurofilament in the tofersen approval. But let's not forget, there was a group led by Philip van Dam in Belgium that contributed to the wealth of knowledge. There's a big group in Germany contributing to the wealth of knowledge. And there's a third group led by Martin Turner in the UK, actually identifying a second biomarker for us to look for. Where are the gaps? This is, I'll try to be brief, hard for me. I spent last week in Australia, and the purpose of the meeting in Australia was to bring 15 or 20 of us from around the world to say, why can't we share better? Right? So because academics have a hard time putting aside the fact that it's their data, as you know, and they're very protective, and they resist the help that people are offering to make their data better and cleaner and make the data shareable. So, so one of the big gaps is what do you do beyond neurofilament? So there are clinical measures, the ALS-FRS, we're working on improving that. There are searches for additional measures, but we came up with a couple of really important takeaways. We're going to see if we can act them, but one of the big takeaways is sharing. I know this is amazing, We have it in the clinical side, sharing the biorepositories from different clinical trials in ALS of the placebo arms. We've started it with PROACT, but that is a data collection, doesn't really include a lot of what we need for the next phase. So that's one. So I'm gonna be, of course, talking to many pharma who are sitting on biorepositories that they may never, ever use.
Yes.
So patients have contributed in good faith by signing an ICF saying that there are exploratory, their tissue or serum is available for future exploratory research. But a company had a failed ALS trial. That's a whole other issue. We've got to shift from all comers to personalized, more homogeneous, more directed trials. But just getting all that sera in a PROACT-like manner would be extraordinary for not only the researchers, but the small biotech that are trying to come up with biomarkers for their programs. That was one. The second seems smaller, and then I'll end. But it's actually huge because it's people's careers. So you got to get the career part down a little bit and the joint purpose up a little bit. There are at least 3 efforts currently to set up longitudinal natural history ALS programs with a collection of serum, CSF, and then other things. Home assessments, MRIs, ePhys, lots of different things. One is American, one is European, and then there's this little quiet Canadian one, and Australia wants to do one. The other big recommendation is we actually talk to each other to make sure we're collecting the data the same, we're collecting the sera the same, we're collecting the MRI data the same, so that when a small company, Curalis is one I'm working with, Econeso is a new startup, they both need different types of data. And even if they come up with a great idea, they have to qualify it before they take it to the regulators. So those are the 2 biggest projects that I can see we could work on.
Beautifully stated. But I want to go to Robin next, because how that links to the vision that was set up for RDCA-DAP to not only be a place where all that integration and collaboration can happen in an individual disease, but how that can also provide a view across diseases that may have commonalities, either from the pathways to the clinical manifestations to maybe some of the druggable targets. So can you comment on how that can further elevate things even more?
So I mean, I think that I think to your point, this is really, data sharing isn't a one point in time the value of the shared data isn't a one point in time kind of proposition, right? It really can help inform the entirety of the drug development process. And I think, sometimes we're looking at data and we're looking at a little piece of the data. And really, when we can look at just the bigger picture and kind of take a step back, kind of like what you were talking about with not just focusing on a single disease, but kind of being able to look across diseases. There is that benefit, right? And the shared learnings, and none of us is perfect. And so we all, we don't get things right always the first time when we're looking at things. And so having that shared experience and kind of sharing lessons learned and things is really, really important, that cross collaboration. And so really looking at data kind of across the drug development program and bringing a lot of stakeholders to the table to participate in that is really, I think, critically important to advancing drug development.
I guess one of the things that we've heard, this is all important, and we've mentioned to Angela about sharing. Maybe each of the panelists can talk about what are some of the best practices for promoting data sharing, and maybe some of the obstacles that you've seen that could be easily overcome to encourage data sharing, and we can start on that end.
Easily, please, easily overcome.
Easily. Yes, not the Nobel Peace Prize version, but
That's not easy, definitely. And I think I listened to what you've said, Rich, saying that indeed patient wants the data to be used, but they want also to get information about how it has been used and for which purpose. If I bring the European perspective into it, I will say, you know, in Europe, we have the GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulation. The issue we have with this is that it's Europe, but it has its own implementation locally, nationally. So in Italy, for example, they're very strict on it, and that's why we still miss Italy from this map I've shown. So it means that you still have some effort to be made indeed for these data access, data sharing. Even cross-border, we say we have some data sets that cannot leave the country, for example. So that's another point, even if the network we build, the TDA-RWE, is on purpose not to move the data, but at least to use the data where they are. I'm still confident because I will say in Europe, we have since end of April, a law that has been voted about the European health data space. And I think it will move quite a lot regarding this topic. Just to explain very shortly, I don't know if you're familiar with this, the EHDS, as we say, it's in fact primary use and secondary use as we do in observational, but it's not just observational data, it's also clinical trial data. So it means primary use, if you take my case, I'm French, you can hear it. So I've worked also some years in Germany, and now I work in Amsterdam, Netherlands. So it means that part of my medical file is in France, another part is in Germany, another part is now in the Netherlands. If I'm going to Sweden or Italy for vacation, if something is happening, hopefully not, but I need an urgent surgery, then there is no way currently to know if I take an anticoagulant, if I have something, a disease that will preclude some specific surgery or things like this. So thanks to the EHDS and all this data are supposed to be connected and then used. But more importantly for us, it's the secondary use. It means that we will be able to get also this data and use it for research purpose. There have been long debates in Europe about indeed opt-in or opt-out option. So hopefully what has been endorsed is the opt-out, because the opt-in would have been a disaster for us, honestly, which means that indeed the patient will have to actively say, yes, I want my data to be used. Now it's more data are used because it's a public health interest first. And if you disagree with this, you just to express that, no, I don't want my data to be used. So hopefully, thanks to all these efforts, the standardization, the connectivity, the exchangeability and things like this, data access will be improved. But yeah, it's still a long way to go.
As an example, I think that the Duchenne disease is actually a very good example of data sharing. In fact, I mean, there are plenty of natural history data. The placebo arm of different studies actually have been shared with different consortia. So I think that is certainly something very good. I think some of the challenges that were mentioned before, I think will become a complication in the future, or probably have already become a complication. So.
Quick question, because we cover this. Go ahead.
If I may add just quickly, it's true that I was focusing a lot on this data, but the HDS will also help the pharma to bring, like you've said, all the clinical trial data into one unique ecosystem. So it will be also for the secondary use an additional asset. And I think that may help also to get the size we need sometimes for rare disease, because data are just, we don't know where they are, by the way, but just delocalized, and that's one.
And I do have an example of a recent recommendation. We had the benefit of having the National Academies of Science have a committee that was formed that did an in-depth analysis and did interviews, extensive interviews to have learnings. And one of their recommendations was to create an interoperable ALS data repository that would be could be tapped into and shared to advance and accelerate the development of drugs. Now, this is a concept, but it can be borrowed from some of the concepts that I've been working on for years. We had a thing called the High Tech Act, which established the architecture for sharing clinical data across this country. We are still not at interoperability, but we have those bones, and we have things like the US CDI. We have a common nomenclature with LOINC and SNOMED and RX norm. All those standards are important, and one of the rules that we can conceive of having these private-public partnerships is that we can decide on how we move forward. So things like the most recent thing that I've heard of is this Vulcan project. If people want to look into that as well, that will be a use case or series of use cases for sharing research data that the HL7 is developing. And so that can be turned to a national standard so that people can, in this country, treat research data the same way that they would the clinical data and be able to integrate that finally. So there are a lot of things that can be done in the near term because we have a track record and a history of trying to build these very complex systems. But hopefully now we can not only focus on those, but also wrap around data systems, things like using remote physiologic monitoring, using various wearable technologies, finding other ways to build digital profiles beyond just the biomarkers that we've been talking about.
Great setup for the Lunch and Learn with Ramon and Alex today about RDCA. That was a fantastic setup for that.
Angela, do you want to go next about best practices?
Well, it's when you do this kind of sharing of data, there are very basic hurdles that we're trying to overcome, and you've identified one of the big ones, which was set up to protect people, individuals, which is the GDPR was set up specifically to protect people's privacy. And in an overall sense, it's actually been really important. It just is counterproductive in what we do. And how we get around that, I hope what you have expressed will work. The European group, Precision ALS, has done a lot of work. They want to start a prospective clinical and biorepository collection. They've done a lot of work with their extant data. They are struggling so badly to do the biorepository piece. And if any of you are in early drug development and you're entering a disease area where your target engagement biomarker is not solid, or your disease modification work is not solid, those biorepositories are so important. So I think getting the clinical data shared is the first step, but this other data set that we talked about last week, and I think it applies to everything that we do. I've been somewhat involved in the FSH world, and having one company build a huge data set for the rest of the community, that's one technique, but it's not the fastest technique. So it would be good to find a way to share, because patients commit to giving this to first, it's always for them, honestly, because they've had a terrifying disease, or and their life expectancy is very short, and they're panicked, and they want that change in the life expectancy. But truly, it becomes altruistic. And to have these biorepositories with these difficulties in combining them, and biospecimens sitting in, I'm going to be slightly facetious, the back room of a big pharma, because they've moved out of ALS because their big trial failed. And that's happened very recently. I think we just got to lower those barriers somehow.
And I think that, yeah, go.
Or increase the incentives.
Ask though, and this is a little off topic, but
Yeah.
I think, in the context of data sharing, like, especially when you're talking about biospecimens that are finite, right? Like, I mean, MRI image you can use over and you can analyze multiple times, but these biospecimens are really finite.
Yeah.
And so like ensuring that what you learn from those biospecimens is also shared back is really so critically important, right? Because that's, and like thinking about how to do that, especially upfront. And getting people to kind of agree about what's going to be shared upfront feels so critically important, right?
And I totally agree with you, Robin, because biospecimens are not infinite. So you've set the bar high, but you have to lower the bars for the access and sharing. But you don't want everyone going in and taking samples, they'll be gone.
And particularly doing the same testing and trying to answer the same question
Oh,
repeatedly, right?
yeah, that is huge. I'm gonna have one more plug. My learnings about this have come out of the fact that the Neuro has become an open science institute, okay? And there are lots of ups and downs with open science. I'm not here to sell that concept. But one of the really important parts is that if you do an experiment, you have to get it out, you have to publish it in some way, shape, or form. You cannot sit on negative experiments. Conversely, if you get a positive, a good result, that also has to be shared. And I think that sort of behavior, it's in Europe, they have, and I forget the name of it, they actually grade institutions. And they grade companies based on their speed with which they share data, positive and negative. It's one stick, but I think if we figure out another way, I think we could really move much faster.
So in the spirit of connecting the dots, because that was a great point to connect a lot of dots.
Yeah.
So the first one is understand that if you have data that are finite, what should be the context of use for the different analyses that can be done with those so that we can maximize the value of the data,
right,
to turn that into actionable knowledge. Sharing the information back, not just the data into the standardized databases, but make sure that we positively or actively share everything that was done with the data in a digestible way. That speaks to the misinformation, disinformation topic that Rob Califf brought up yesterday. But also making sure that through the voice of the people that actually contribute the data, that they become the force that helps solve that seeming contradiction of the societal push for data privacy, but also the maximization of data value. And the way to solve that is what Steve Gleason commented on the video: collaboration, and make sure that those voices are heard. So that was a fantastic point. You connected a ton of dots. Yesterday's award went to Teresa. I guess today's award goes to you for dot connecting. Yeah.
Does the audience have any questions for Mike Williams? We have. So.
There's one.
Right here.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Lots to think about here. Andrea Pauls-Backman, ALS Strategy Consulting. So rarely does my last decade of doing ALS advocacy and my prior life of doing private equity come together, but here we are. Okay. My feeling is this. We've talked about sharing data samples and biorepositories. It is a business proposition at the end of the day, right? It needs funding. We need to plan for it. We need to incentivize it. So research funders, in my view, need to require data sharing from the outset. It becomes a cost of doing business. And then you're addressing the consent issues, you're addressing the IP issues from the very beginning. So I'm going to put it out there.
Amen.
I said it's on. Cherie Butts Biogen. One of the things as I'm listening to all of you, I mean, I agree with it, but I'm wondering what have been your strategies for getting consent to share data from individuals who are marginalized, traumatized, or forgotten? Because we always talk about having more representative data, but your approach has to be different with those groups who have experienced bad situations with the system. So I wanted to ask you guys, how do you get people from those communities to actually agree to share their data?
Who are you starting with? We're all looking at you, Rich.
Well, I'm going to take it a step higher and just say that from my experience with this, I don't believe ALS story is written. If I were to tell you that ALS, the way you describe this disease is a white man's disease who's over 60 years old, I've met 20-year-olds females. I've met 30-year-old females. I have met children that have ALS, and that doesn't tell their story. So in many respects, we need to do better about telling this story, especially since we are now going to entered into a world of artificial intelligence. And the way that we feed these data streams is by the available data that we have. And that's why I'm advocating for, let's use every conceivable data point that we can have, whether or not it's very clinically driven, highly, thoughtful, research data that was done at a university, or a data set that was collected by a home health agency because they're on the ground. So all that is important, and we can utilize that data. And I think it's more of the common agreements in helping to, and that's the educational piece of this cake that I built at the beginning of this, was we have to be clear with folks as far as what they're going to be, the data is utilized for. They want to contribute to that, but there also has to be some sort of feedback loop that we share and improve their lives because they were willing to be part of this progress in the process, because we cannot do this alone. In ALS, there's a roughly 30 to 33,000 people in the United States that currently have this disease of all varying aspects, from somebody who was recently diagnosed to people who are in advanced stages in wheelchairs who have lost their voices on ventilators. Everybody from that person that was recently diagnosed, even to pre-diagnosis, to the data that can be collected towards the end of life is valuable. So we need to be able to ensure that people can have the opportunities to contribute wherever they are.
So I'm going to add to that just slightly and take it to the other extreme. The communities that are not white middle class communities with ALS, in some data sets suggest that it takes longer for them to get diagnosed. They have less access to even the multidisciplinary care. They won't share it with their community. And my reference point is First Nations community that's actually one of the wealthiest in Canada, but sits in Montreal. And I know that community very well. And the first time I went about a decade ago to just talk to them about entering clinical trials, because I had 2 or 3 patients, one with ALS, one with a rare myopathy, a family with FSH. And they were afraid to let me in the door because their experience with clinical research was anthropologists coming in, taking their data, publishing it. And so there are walls there. This is one example. We can do it. The history of hereditary amyloid in the Black population in the US is another great example. But I think the most important thing is to be mindful. Because when you're mindful of the fact you're missing a population, then you will look for the ways to lower that barrier. We've been working for 10 years for them to accept the fact that clinical trials are not an outside threat. So just awareness already makes a difference. That's, I think your point's well taken.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. And Sherry and I are partners in crime in another effort through the drug forum that cares about that. But your point is so valid because it speaks to the notion of being mindful about equity and understanding what the unmet needs of the communities are. There are communities that are ready to get their story into the full spectrum of the story. There are communities that still don't see the value in doing that. And the only way to get to them to understand the value is not by doing a pitch to them, but listening to them and let them vocalize and verbalize and communicate what they see as their unmet needs. And I didn't speak to that at length because as a Hispanic immigrant with a German first name, thanks to my grandmother, that's that I'm very sensitive to that. Thank you for asking that question, Sharon.
So Klaus, to give you the amen, brother, that's a good one. Okay. Robin.
So I think the point is that this is not like a one and done type thing, right? And it's just like all of data sharing. Like you can't think of it after the fact and like then rush to kind of implement it, right? Because then you don't have the systems in place. You don't have that the right consent. You don't have the right relationships and trust built. So I think really to your point, like you need to be mindful, and it really takes that forethought and that building the infrastructure to be able to carry this out. And you can't kind of do it at the end rapidly because time is running out on the contract and we got to get it done type such. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yep. Just one quick comment on the connecting the dots theme. On the biorepository side of things, I would encourage folks, if they're interested, to take a look at the network for pancreatic organ donors with diabetes. This is an academic group. They have done a phenomenal job of collecting extremely valuable samples, sharing those broadly with the community. That data comes back in, it's accessible to researchers, so you can see what people have done before, whether it worked or not, worked depending on your definition. But all of that comes back. They have an annual meeting where everybody that's done work in the previous year presents what they've been working on, what they're finding. As a template, that might be something worth looking at. They've started collecting imaging data now as well. So they continue to add. They even provide some level of funding for researchers to ask certain questions, supported by Breakthrough T1D and Helmsley. So to the earlier point about finding the funding, that's important as well. These things aren't cheap to maintain, but maybe a template there for folks to take a look at.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, panelists, and appreciate your time and your insight into this session.
Thank you.
Thanks.